All right, what's up, everybody on YouTube? As you may already know or may not know, I totally screwed up when we did this podcast and did not hit record on the cameras. So, unfortunately, you're not going to get the video during the actual audio. We did think of a couple of ways to potentially fix that. One of them, the best one that we could think of, looked a little something like this.
Inside of these rangefinders to actually make them work. You know, there's lasers, there's optics, there's what's happening to get you that range.
Yeah, good question. So really it starts with a laser diode, and that's what's emitting it's a non-visible spectrum of light out. Typically it's a 905 nanometer wavelength laser, but that is kind of reserved more for military, and that's due to visibility for night vision devices. So 905 you can see with a lot of, I'd say, mid to higher end night vision equipment. But 1550 is folks operating in the military sphere.
The 905.
Yep.
It tends to be all else similar. It tends to be able to range a little further, though, doesn't it? Or am I making that up?
You are making that up.
Cool. Sounds good.
It's actually interesting. We just talked about this not too long ago. The reason why you're able to range farther with a 1550.
So anyway, we figured that would get pretty annoying over the course of about an hour and a half. So we're just going to show you folks on YouTube here a quick glimpse of the actual Razer rangefinder that we talk about towards the end of the video. Now, towards the end of the podcast. Now, if you want to learn more about it, obviously listen to the end of this podcast or check it out on our website. It should pop up here soon, if not on the day of the podcast, very shortly after. So, new Razer HD 4000 rangefinder. Super sweet. You can hear all about it on the podcast here, listen to the full thing, and then check it out later on our other social media platforms. Thanks, everybody.
The topic for today is rangefinders. The people are myself, Jimmy, Mark, Paul Neess, who's been on a podcast before, a time or two, and Rob Morell, like the mushrooms.
Like
but it's spelled different, isn't
differently. It? Two L's, I believe. Two L's is my last name. I think Morell Mushroom is just one L.
And there might be, is there an E on the end?
I think that might be Morale.
Oh, right.
We go completely
the thing we're always trying to improve around the workplace. All right. So anyway, the reason we bring that up and the reason we bring Rob into this podcast is because we're going to be discussing a certain product category, which is, if you've already clicked on the episode, you already know we're going to be talking about rangefinders. And so rangefinders are a very important tool for hunters and shooters, and we're going to get into that. First, we'll let Rob, anytime we bring on a new guest, we'll let them introduce themselves. So, Rob, why don't you tell the listeners out there who you are, what you do, and maybe a little fun fact about yourself if you're really feeling crazy.
Oh, sure. So work in product development alongside a lot of very talented engineers, project managers to make some really exciting products here at Vortex. Always striving to create the best value for the customer. And let's see, a little bit about me. Born and raised in Wisconsin. Fun fact, non-hunting, shooting related, I guess, 'cause I'm sure people get a lot of those, is I have a weird obsession about car tires. I really like learning about those and giving people recommendations on things they're looking for in their vehicles and stuff like that. Don't know why, just it's an important thing, holds you to the ground. So
it's not like the TV shows. You're not actually, that I see, like sometimes it's like with some weird obsession where like you're eating the car tires.
No, no, it's just it's more knowledge based.
Okay.
Occasionally turn them into a piece of furniture, things like that, but no consumption of tire rubber.
Maybe just a smell or two.
Yeah,
I was
right.
gonna say when you go into the
good rubber smell. Yeah.
When you go into the shop, does that just like
That really gets me going. Yeah.
Look, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the smell of a fresh new tire.
There's something special about it.
I agree.
I'm not even a car guy, and I like that.
I've consulted Rob on car tires before, and he definitely
one
knows
has
stuff.
has the best odor? And
Right? Yeah. He knows the stuff. It's to the point that it's a little bit odd.
Yeah.
I think when you start talking about compounds and treads and wear and
tread wear
all
and
that
compounds
stuff.
and tread patterns and all that fun stuff. Yep.
all
do
that
tread patterns really make a difference, or do they just look cool?
No, absolutely make a difference.
Do they?
Oh yeah. Look at a summer tire compared to a winter tire; it's not even close.
So that there is that, but when you look at like winter tire to winter tire to winter tire, all else similar.
Oh yeah.
Do those patterns make difference? I mean, some of them just. I gotta admit, when I'm looking at tires, I'm looking for the coolest looking one.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's a selling point.
Here I am, another self-proclaimed car guy, and I'm
Yeah,
just
I
saying
guess
that
at the risk of this devolving into a tire podcast,
that's quite all right.
I'll just say
Here we go.
there's a functional difference on tread pattern. But anyway.
Okay, good to know. Well, sweet. So with that said, like Rob said, he works in product development, and we brought him in to maybe explain some of the real technical details of rangefinders. Obviously, we got Mark and Paul here, some avid hunters who have used rangefinders in many different scenarios. And well, I'd be curious to talk to you guys, to all you guys, about kind of maybe a brief history of the rangefinder. Kind of what it is that they do. Maybe Rob, you can speak a little bit to how they work. One thing too, like what did people do before rangefinders?
Well, I can tell you, I was thinking of that as we were putting this podcast together, and I was professionally guiding at the time rangefinders hit the market, and it was at the time that happened. That was somewhere in the early '90s, and Bushnell was the first one that came out with a commercial product. It was kind of a boxy looking thing about the size of a big full size binocular.
I remember that.
It was game changing. It was in black and white. There was the days before it, and there was the days after it. It was instantly a product that
Probably
everybody, particularly in the West, if you needed one of those from the minute they were announced. Yeah.
Paul, would you say initially, though, it was more game-changing for the bow hunting market than the rifle market? Like maybe just off the go?
Yeah, maybe so. If you looked at the country as a whole, probably that's right. In the West, though, where guys were shooting long distances, and guys were shooting long distances before there were rangefinders,
right?
You immediately knew the value of it. It was funny because I was guiding at the time, and when you were a Western guide in the days before rangefinders, really a pretty good part of what your job was being able to call distances for guys, tell them how far
Just
something
really
was, because there was no other way. Before rangefinders, you could measure with reticle marks. There were sort of the coincidence rangefinders. I don't know if you've ever seen those, Rob. You'd kind of merge two images together, and then it would spin up a little dial and it'd give you an estimate on yardage.
Wait, what? This sounds like something I found in a cereal box as a kid.
I mean, they kind of looked like that. They were not very expensive, and it was obviously not very precise.
It almost sounds like when you see a reticle with the silhouettes in it. Is that what you're saying? So like those would be correlated.
You'd look through. You'd get sort of two different optical images, and you would move. And I forget how it did it. I want to say it kind of slid in and out, but you would move the device until the two images merged into one. And then it would give you, it was some sort of a triangulation, something off your IPD, but they worked okay. I mean, they were better than a guess. But as a guide, we rarely used those things. You sort of relied on your experience and knowledge of the country you were in, and your ability to call distances and tell a guy how far it was. And it was really, to me, it was really eye-opening. I immediately saw the value of those things. I bought one as soon as they came out. And so I was going from, literally from one hunting season not using any sort of laser device to the next season, same country, same terrain, same values, ranges, valleys, hills, all of it. And I knew the ranges that I had sort of visually estimated it was at in the past. Well, it was pretty eye-opening to come back with a laser and hit distances and see where I was on, where I was off.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, sometimes I did okay, sometimes it was terrible. It was funny. One of the things I remember very distinctly learning was that any time I visually went and estimated across a deep valley or a canyon, almost always you would visually overestimate distances because of the big gulf and span of space below you, and vice versa. If it was a flat level terrain, you typically underestimated distances. It was usually further than what you thought it was. So it was fascinating. It was really cool.
Back then, how far were rangefinders shooting out? I mean, nowadays you see 1,000, 2,000, 3. I mean, up. And up.
I want to say the first Bushnells were like 400 yards.
Okay.
I think is about what it was. Yeah.
Okay.
And then as time sort of went by and evolved, the rangefinders started slowly creeping out further and further. and they got smaller and less bulky.
That's super cool. Yeah, and you talk about too, like when you were saying back in the day, you'd have to just kind of rely on your instincts to know how or to estimate how far some away was. It makes you think when I've watched some of these specials about the old World War II snipers and stuff, and you talk about a time when dope actually sort of came into existence, where somebody would say, well, when I'm aiming at something that looks that far away, I got to hold over here, I got to dial that much or whatever, and there's dope for estimating ballistics and stuff and where a bullet's going to drop at certain places at certain elevations and stuff. But there's like a data on previous sightings. It's like DOPS or something for just estimating how far away something was. You could probably get a sense for like, if a ram looks about that big, if it looks like an ant, then I know it's about that far away. Or if it looks like
and you may not know this either, but the origins of the MilDOT reticle were for ranging. They weren't for bullet drops, wind drift, holdover, any of that. That was conceived and devised as a way to range distances.
Okay.
That's what it was used for. And then guys figured out you could use those same numbers to estimate bullet drop and holdover, but primarily it was a ranging tool.
Huh. Yeah. It's cool. It's cool stuff.
No, it is. When I was first thinking, I was like, because really when rangefinders came out, definitely were people shooting long range? Yes. Were people out west shooting probably longer ranges than folks out east? Yeah, just because of the terrain and how things lay out. But this long range game that we see today, it's at least for sure on the level that it is right now and how accessible it is to folks, was not there. So at first I was like, oh, well, maybe, the bow guys were adopting it more because you have that very pronounced ballistic curve where even 1 to 2 yards makes a really big difference.
Well, that too, and but any archer, even if you're hunting in the East Coast, you might have spots where you could shoot 30, 40, 50 yards, even nowhere near a mountain. And obviously, with a bow at those distances, it's critical to know how far it is. So,
but then I was almost even correcting my initial thought there, because the difference, with even a common big game caliber, and it's easy to misjudge distance by 100-200 yards, heck, maybe even more. But the difference between 200 yards and 300 yards with your bullet drop is pretty actually darn significant. And between 3 and 4, a lot of common calibers, that's, so just to have that knowledge out to 4, that's,
it's
just a game changer.
It was absolutely game changing.
How different would probably even the modern hunting rifles and cartridges be too, because you look at the prom king of cartridges, as Ian Clem has described it, the 6.5 Creedmoor, and sure, maybe for the long distance target shooters and stuff, but a lot of these kind of longer hunting cartridges, and in fact, actually, sometimes some of these long distance competitive cartridges have come out of a hunting cartridge or whatever, but you wouldn't have needed all those things perhaps because you just wouldn't have comprehended shooting as far as you can when you have a rangefinder.
I that's not necessarily
or
true.
Do you think that it
there were lots of very hot rod, very capable long range cartridges way before there were rangefinders.
Were they primarily for target shooting though?
No. Oh no. No. Guys were hunting with some pretty impressive long range, but that change has not. It has improved. Obviously, the bullet design in particular is a lot better. Guys have really learned about making very slippery high BC bullets that were probably less common back in those days. But it wasn't that guys weren't trying to shoot long. And I know there were guys in those days that were probably trying to shoot animals at 700-800 yards, but you can imagine without knowing a distance exactly. That's kind of a crapshoot.
It's the most important part of the ballistic calculation is knowing the distance. Way more than wind or humidity or anything else. So
Paul, do you think those hot rod cartridges though were almost in some ways to overcome that you don't have a rangefinder? So the flatter and faster that bullet's going,
sure, it helped. The flatter the trajectory. Obviously, it did assist in that. Yeah, absolutely.
That's true. So, Rob, now talking about we've kind of let's fast forward to nowadays. You look at the rangefinders that we have. out here on the table. I guess we didn't even say back at the beginning. We're gonna introduce to you guys a new rangefinder in this podcast. If you stick around towards the end, we don't want to make these things into a full on. If you're watching on YouTube, you've already seen the box on the table. So
maybe you can't read it though.
It's possible. We don't want to turn these into a full on Vortex commercial. So we're going to chat a little bit about rangefinders and whatnot first. But you look at it on the table here. We have monocular rangefinders. We have a binocular rangefinder. What's going on inside of these rangefinders to actually make them work? There's lasers, there's optics, there's what's happening to get you that range?
Yeah, good question. So really, it starts with a laser diode, and that's what's emitting it's a non-visible spectrum of light out. Typically, it's a 905 nanometer wavelength laser for most consumer products. There's also another popular one is 1550 nanometers, but that is kind of reserved for military, and that's due to visibility for night vision devices. So 905 you can see with a lot of, I'd say, mid to higher end night vision equipment. But 1550 is really, you can only see it with a very high-end night vision setup. So that allows for a little bit more safety and security for folks operating in the military sphere.
The 905.
Yep.
It tends to be all else similar. It tends to be able to range a little further, though, doesn't it? Or am I making that up?
You are making that up.
Cool. Sounds
so
good.
It's actually interesting. We just talked about this not too long ago. The reason why you're able to range farther with a 1550, actually, I'm sorry. What you said, all else being equal, is correct. But what you're able to achieve with a 1550 nanometer wavelength is you're able to pump a whole lot more power out with it being still eye safe. So effectively, you're able to range farther as a result of that, while keeping the same level of eye safety
I see.
to a human.
Okay.
So if you had the same power output, you're right, you'd be able to range farther with a 905, but you're just able to pump way more power out from a 1550.
Cool.
So
cool.
Yep.
So that was going to be a big question that I had. So is it the power output that affects the difference between, like, we've got, a Ranger 1800 here and then the Fury HD 5000. So is that just the power out? It's just horsepower that's driving that laser further? Or I guess what makes one range more or less than a different one?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a couple of different variables, I guess, coming into it. One is just power, just raw, how much energy you're throwing, or the energy of the laser coming out. So how much power you're supplying to the laser. Another is what's called the pulse train of the lasers. So if you think of it kind of like a Morse code of the laser being emitted, when you press a range button, very rarely will it just be a continuous output stream of a laser. You'll have some sort of kind of like long and short bursts, which is called a pulse train. That's fired out when you press a measure button.
Like Morse code.
Like Morse code for lasers. And then you've got kind of the receiving side of things, which is really algorithm driven and like signal processing related to kind of decrypt the signal that comes back. So kind of those three things working in tandem really allow for increased ranging performance. And then different things on the hardware side allow you to do that. And I guess on the software side with programming and the algorithmic side of things allow you to handle that signal processing differently. So for example, you could have a really sophisticated algorithm in a lower power laser and potentially get more ranging performance than you could be if you're just jamming a ton of output and not being able to really interpret that intelligently on the receiving side. So I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but all three of those things are kind of like a triangle that you can use to create more ranging performance out of rangefinder.
How about like as far as like a receiving lens size? Does that have any of the mechanisms that's catching that signal coming back?
Yeah.
Does that have anything to play?
Yeah,
in that
thanks for
too?
bringing that up, Paul. So it certainly does. I guess all else being equal, if you look at a binocular, we've got our Fury here, which is a 10 by 42. So you have 42 millimeter diameter lenses effectively that can gather that return signature. Whereas if you're looking at a monocular, I think those are anywhere from like 24
small,
to
yeah.
26 millimeters. So you've got a lot less effective area to capture that return laser signal.
So when you develop an optical system for a laser range finding binocular, you not only have to make like the objective lenses and any optics in front of that laser for producing a good image quality, but you also have to make them aid in the laser range finding portion of things. Right?
Yeah. So it's really like it's more complicated, I would say, than doing a binocular and a rangefinder separately, because you have to figure out how to put them, together and make the whole system work. So if like it was a level of difficulty of 5 to design a binocular and 3 to design a rangefinder, that would just be like maybe a professional measurement system where it wouldn't have optics associated with it. It's not necessarily an 8. If you added those two things together to design a rangefinder binocular, it might be something like a 10 or 11, because you got to figure out how to still make the optics good, how to still have effectively an optical path for the laser to be emitted and received. And there's a lot more that goes into it with coatings on prisms and shaping the beam that's being emitted from the laser diode, and beam divergence, and all kinds of stuff that's required in order to make a good product.
Yeah,
So.
and that probably doesn't surprise many of our older customers out there who, for years, for example, the laser bino was our most requested item.
It was.
And it sort of took us a while before we were able to tiptoe into that and do it. It wasn't something that was just sort of easily done on a snap of the fingers.
Well, yeah, and do it the way we want it too, because it's not like super high end, like ultra high end, really expensive range finding binos. They already exist, and you can make one that's cheap, but then is it going to perform good? We kind of wanted one that was kind of striking that middle road too,
and
so that was
affordable to the average guy too.
Exactly,
that's always been a big thing for us.
So what's like you said, and like you alluded to, I mean, obviously, kind of what we're doing is shooting a laser out, and it's coming back, and then the rangefinder is dissecting that returned laser to hopefully give us a range. Now, that relies on a couple of things to happen, right? So, in some ways, we're going to combine in a few of maybe we wanted to talk about some tips perhaps that help you maximize the effective performance of your rangefinder, but then I think that also winds up going into how these things work. But each one of these rangefinders has a number associated with it, for example, right? So that's kind of the maximum effective range, essentially. But a lot of that has to do with the target that you're ranging to, right? So this is something that I think people run into a lot when they see a Ranger 1800 that's sitting right in front of me right now.
Right.
Ranger 1800, they think that anything within 1800 yards, fair game. Man, if I just point and click, boom, it's going to give me that range. But not necessarily, because my target might differ. All rangefinders, basically, they're measured, their maximum distance is measured based on a reflective target, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, all of our products currently have the number that's associated on the product, Fury 5000, Ranger 1800, Impact 850, I believe, is correlating to a reflective, or what we call a cooperative target. So that's something that would be like a street sign, stop sign or highway sign, or something that's really reflective, because that's a very consistent way of measuring. So it's like you kind of have a very fair apples to apples when you're looking at a reflective target. But, that's not super helpful for people that are hunting, or even guys that are shooting competitively, shooting steel targets, because those, I think you're starting to see that more and more now, where maybe next to a steel target, you'll have a reflective little medallion or something like that. So it's a little bit more helpful with rangefinders. But a lot of times they're a painted steel target, which isn't going to have that same level of reflectivity. But
more reflective than a deer.
More reflective
like the
than
hide
a deer.
On a deer where it's got all that fur, hair, or whatever they have.
Typically, kind of what we look at as the 3 different tiers of reflectivity are a reflective target, like a street sign that I mentioned. Then we look at trees, which we typically look at a deciduous tree, so with leaves, right? Did I get my plant etymology or whatever correctly?
Could fooled me.
So you have some reflectivity off the tree with leaves on it, or if they're bare. So we try to incorporate both of those things, and then we call deer kind of the third category, or some sort of animal that's got a coat or fur or something like that. And so as you kind of move along that spectrum, they tend to be less reflective. And then I'd say like way on the end of the spectrum would be like a black bear. I mean, it's like shooting into
black. Yeah,
it's
black
like
bears,
shooting into
black
space
cows,
almost
it
with that
sucks up
thing.
that
Yeah, it
laser
sucks
and
up a lot of that energy.
never
and
comes out.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
That's
that's-
what I wanted to bring
that's-
up color.
That's
Yeah.
weird. To some people, they're gonna be. It doesn't make sense because you know how can a color be sucking up light? But does that have to do with the fact that like would a white target be more highly reflective? I imagine than a black target. Is that because
Yeah.
white is reflecting all colors?
Yep.
When you see anything that's white, it's reflecting all colors back to you. Whereas when you see something that's black, it's actually the absence of color, right? So it's
Yeah.
light isn't really being reflected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you look at like a surface, you've got kind of three properties of light. You've got, let's see if I can get these right. You've got reflectance, you've got transmission, and then you got emissivity. So like if you look at, I guess, all of those things together, black tends to be the least cooperative of the colors when you look at that.
I think it's counterintuitive to people too, because when you're hunting and you're using your eyesight, a jet black object, generally saying, unless you're at night or it's in a burned out field or something, a jet black object usually leaps out at you. And anybody who's done spot and stalk hunting for black bears, I mean, generally black bears are not terribly difficult to see if they're moving in green vegetation in the spring or in the fall.
Right.
They stand out pretty well compared to, say, a mule deer, a sheep or something
that's
else
more-
that blends in a lot more.
That's more of a contrast thing, though, than it's going to
Maybe,
be
Yeah,
a
exactly.
it would be,
reflectivity
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Because most things in nature aren't always jet black.
Right.
And the other thing too that is sometimes I've noticed with things that are like, I have a dog whose coat is basically jet black,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes if the sun hits it just right, it actually is shiny, and kind of like shiny white. But that I don't know what's happening there.
That's probably
but-
more related to
Like the oils or
oils
something
on the fur. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So those colors can make a difference. Man, when you start talking about colors and wavelengths and all that stuff, I just, we're sitting in a room right now. And again, for those watching on YouTube, you've seen the evolution of this podcast studio now with all these colors and things and stuff. And every single thing around the room now that we see as far as a color goes is a matter of light being reflected off, but different wavelengths of light are reflecting off different surfaces, which is pretty wild. And a laser, when you shoot that out, that's part of, that's light, right?
It is. It's just outside the visible spectrum.
Yeah.
To our naked eye, at least. Yep.
Yeah. So one thing that you mentioned too, another phrase that came up is beam divergence and beam shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that can make a difference. So when you shoot a laser out, you're not shooting like a straight line way out to, let's say, Fury 5000, you're ranging something at 1,500 yards, right? You're not just shooting a dead straight pin line all the way out to that
Like
thing.
a laser
and-
pointer.
I was gonna say like a laser beam or
Right.
Yeah, that's not how
or
that
is it a
works.
laser beam?
No, it's not. So yeah, it's not a collimated beam of light. And when I say collimated, everything being parallel.
Oh, really? Okay.
So like a laser pointer would be, and you have a very pinpoint
Tight, yeah.
So laser pointers actually don't have the same beam divergence thing that rangefinders do?
Right. So so basically what's happening with a rangefinder is you have an emitter, and that emitter is kind of emitting in an omnidirectional or like 360 sphere type of thing. And that's resident in the rangefinder in different locations. And then typically what's happening with that is it's bouncing off of some number of surfaces of some material type, whether it may be an aluminum mirror or it may be a glass prism or something like that. And then what's happening ultimately when it's coming out of the rangefinder itself is it's coming out at an angle. So if you think about when you're looking at subtensions for a reticle and it's like in MOA or in mils, that's an angular type of unit, right? So the farther you go out in distance, the wider that becomes, or the taller that becomes. So it's the same type of concept here with a rangefinder, in that beam, when it's starting, it's coming out at whatever the aperture or the size of the lens is, but it's coming out in some sort of angular configuration. And that's kind of where we get into beam divergence. And some rangefinders will have a beam divergence, and what we talk about that is really beam shape is another way to look at that. And so You can have a variety of shapes. I think some of the more common ones are kind of more of a closer to a perfect circle. And so you'd be kind of utilizing the entire 360 degrees of the aperture of the transmission.
So you're
lens.
talking about, and for those listening here, we're talking about
Sorry.
you look down the rangefinder from the front end, the business end. Don't range yourself in the eye.
Right. We can get into eye safety in a little bit.
We can get into eye safety here in a
Yep.
bit. It's not that it's immediately going to singe you, but
Right.
Anyway, there's the lens that you're actually looking through.
Correct.
And that's like your objective lens, like on any kind of an optic,
Right.
For as far as I'm familiar. And then there's usually, in the case of our impact, there's
three.
There's three total. There's two
Yep.
other lenses in addition to the one that you're looking through. And
Yep.
the other one that I have here is our Ranger. There's one more, but that other lens or the other lenses are where either the laser is going in or coming back, right?
Yeah, I guess
going out or coming back.
I'll explain the difference between a 2 and a 3 eye system is what we call it as well, if that would be helpful.
Sweet.
But yeah, really, I guess kind of going back to the beam divergence thing, when it's coming out of the emission part of the rangefinder, it's going to come out in a certain shape, and that has to do with kind of how the laser diode itself, that's emitting that 905 wavelength signal, is shaped to begin with, and also how the optical train for kind of guiding that laser manipulates that beam as well. So like I was saying before, the two main shapes are kind of a circle and an oval, and those present some, I guess, benefits or drawbacks depending on which is chosen. If you have something that's perfectly or is more closer to a circle than an oval, if you think about trying to range like a deer on a crest of a hill or something like that, and you've got something in front of it that might be like a tree or maybe even a rock, that's a lighter colored rock. If it's a circle and you've got the deer maybe in the middle of the field of view, and that rock is in the bottom third, if you have a circular beam divergence, you might actually be getting a range on that rock more so than you would be on the deer. And there's a lot of other things like that signal processing and algorithm thing that can come into effect as well. But all else being equal, you might end up getting the range from that rock instead of the range from the deer, which could cause you to miss the shot depending on how far it is, what the angle is, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to visualize where that rock might be 100 yards closer to the shooter than the deer is, and therefore throwing that off.
Right.
Yeah.
And then kind of the other shape is more of a kind of like a squished oval, I'd say. And so that gives you an advantage in that situation, in that you need to be less concerned about picking up some things that you wouldn't want to, like above or below the target. And depending on, I guess, on how wide it is, you might need to keep that in mind. You know, if I've taken this circle, if you can imagine that, and then I've now squished it and it's maybe a little bit wider, but it's narrower top to bottom, you might need to think about, well, if there's a tree that's really close to the deer, you know, am I maybe picking that up?
Or if you're trying to shoot between trees, you know,
or if you're trying to shoot between the trees. Now, a fun thing that you can do if you know the beam divergence of your rangefinder is you can just rotate it 90 degrees, and now you've got a vertical beam.
Like gangster gat style.
Yeah, you know, because that's super accurate for shooting pistols, as we all know. But yeah, I mean, that's a trick that you can use if you need to range an animal that's in between some dense trees. You know, you might be able to get a little bit better range from that standpoint. I'd still recommend starting in the vertical orientation, and then you can, you know, kind of spot check it with a quick 90-degree turn and see if that helps you at all.
So now sometimes I imagine that's where some of these algorithms and things on the receiving end come into play, because I know like with the Fury 5000, it has the last mode and the something like that, right?
Yeah, I believe it's just a last mode on this.
The last mode where let's say you are shooting through that hypothetical situation, you see a deer that's through some trees perhaps, and you want to range the deer, but you know that there's the potential that your laser could bounce off a couple of these trees on its way to the deer.
Right.
You know, and then you're getting a few received laser reflections into your receiver there.
Right.
You don't want any of those first ones. You want essentially the last one, which is hopefully, if you're aiming well, that deer.
Right. Yeah, and so that goes into the whole signal processing side of things, the algorithm, as you mentioned, and it's going to take, you know, that information coming back and try to parse out what correlates to a nearer or a farther target, and give you the range that corresponds to that mode. As
This is
best
more-
as it's able.
I guess gets into the tips side of things, if you will. But that last mode is super handy. And then almost like as a pseudo last mode, I like to use the scan mode, which we haven't talked about, but most of these rangefinders have a scan mode to where if you know that tree to the right or left is visibly in the foreground, you can like even start on that and then pan across. And then when you hit where you really want that laser to be, you'll get like that different range. And you're like, okay, cool. The tree's at 300. The deer's at 400.
Yeah, it helps to kind of at least either that or shoot at a couple of laser shots, because you might see where you range and it's like, okay, 200, and then you range again, it says 250. And you're like, okay, and then you can just tell you're right on that edge where it's getting a couple of mixed signals.
Yeah,
if you don't have a mode like a last mode.
And this guy, once we get around to talking about it, has a couple other modes that are really neat too.
Yeah. Now, again, going back to some hypothetical situations, you bring up one where, let's say, a deer is on the crest of a hill or something like that. All these rangefinders in front of us have some kind of an angle compensation, right? So let's say you are looking up or down at an animal or a target, and you range. Now, there's straight line, and there's angle compensated.
Yeah, we call that line of sight and horizontal component distance. I think
Okay.
it's LOS and HCD mode.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Why would I ever want to use one certain one over the other?
Well, it's important if you're shooting or hunting and you're in terrain where you could end up with a high angle shot. The tendency is if you just take a line of sight distance, is that you'll end up shooting high over your target,
Regardless of whether you're shooting down or
up or down. Doesn't matter. You'll still shoot high, and the reason for that is it's essentially if you think about the way gravity is pulling a bullet down, and if you're shooting straight horizontally, gravity is working directly at a 90-degree angle to the path of the bullet. But the further and further you tip the angle of that shot, think about, gravity is always pulling in one direction straight down. The further that shot tips, gravity has less and less an effect on the course of that bullet until if you take it to an extreme, imagine shooting straight up or straight down, gravity won't deflect the path of that bullet at all. It'll either, infinitesimally slow it down as a bullet goes straight up or infinitesimally increase it as it goes straight down.
Yeah.
But it's not gonna pull it off course. So the bullet, the bullet is most affected and pulled off course by gravity when it's shooting straight horizontally. And so that's what happens. The steeper the angle, the tendency is to shoot high because you're putting in too much of a bullet correction for that distance.
as though it were flat.
As though it were flat.
If you put it in LOS mode, your rangefinder is just basically assuming that you're shooting on a flat. I mean, it's still going to give you. It's going to give you the proper distance.
It's just giving you. It's just measuring
it's
whatever
line
it
of
is.
sight.
It's line of sight.
Right.
Yeah.
That's-
But
yeah,
when you
your
put it in the
rangefinder
HCD mode, then it's correcting for that angle, and it shortens the distance, is what it's doing.
Yeah, it's going to give you the straight line distance to that target. Isn't that right? Isn't that like it gives you?
It's sort of
as though they were
it's equivalent to what the straight line with the straight horizontal distance would be. Yeah,
Okay.
and that's where we came
Yeah.
up with the HCD name
It's,
for that.
it's just
Yeah.
doing some very, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's doing some very basic trigonometry
Correct.
to get that
Exactly.
horizontal distance.
Yeah.
It's not taking into effect any ballistic coefficient or anything like that. It's
Right.
not like a full ballistics solution. It's just giving you that
Right.
horizontal component of that range.
Right.
Like
exactly.
I'm trying to think of maybe an extreme hunting scenario. Like picture you're hunting mountain goats and you've got an extreme downhill shot at a billy, like extreme angle downhill shot. And the mountain goat might appear, or maybe even line of sight, heck, he could be 300 yards away. But he could really be just horizontally 100 yards away.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's exactly the way it works.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
the laser straight line is traveling the 300 yards.
Yep.
Right.
But the bullet horizontally was only traveling 100 yards.
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a way to
You're
look
making
at
a
it.
right
Yep.
triangle, basically.
Mhm. That's right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's
It's
very
tricky though, because you have one thing to think about too when you're doing that. Let's say you're doing that and you're shooting a very high angle, very long range shot, and what happens when the wind is blowing? You're getting a good crosswind.
Mhm.
Now you have to be careful because the crosswind is working off, say, a 600-yard distance, when your rangefinder is sort of shorting that down to maybe 400. So you could actually get more wind drift on your bullet than what you think would be if
Because
you go off HCD.
The bullet
so
is in the air
you do
for a
have to be
longer
careful
period of
about
time.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's why, I mean, when you're getting out to longer shots like that, we really like to use a ballistic solver more so than we do like to use HCD mode.
Exactly.
When would anybody ever want to use LOS?
Well, in just what Rob described, let's say you do have that scenario where you have a high angle and a long distance, and maybe you've got some wind. Now it's advantageous for you to use LOS, know exactly what that actual distance is for your wind calculation, but you have to then take that and go over to a ballistic solver. And the other advantage to a ballistic solver is that may use considerably more sophisticated algorithms for correcting bullet flight on angles other than just the pure basic trigonometry that you were talking about. Right. So there's, the HCD works good in a lot of hunting scenarios that guys run into, but when you get down to the extreme range of things, then you need to get a little trickier and more sophisticated in how you're doing it.
I'd imagine bow hunters are probably using HCD quite a bit, especially tree stand guys and stuff.
It's a perfect use for it.
I've got on my list here, before we start a couple of these things. A lot of these ones that I brought up, Mark, you might have a couple too, and Rob and Paul, if you have some that you've heard. A lot of these are FAQs, if you will, that people shoot out our way. Another one that we see often is, somebody is trying to range with a rangefinder, but they just can't seem to get as far as they feel they should get. And, Ranger 1800, and for whatever reason, they just feel like they can't get beyond 1,000 yards. One thing that I've seen is, just hand-holding rangefinders can be, once you get out to a certain distance, that gets pretty tough, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, the light is moving in a perfectly straight path, and when it's coming back, it's, I guess, somewhat scattered. But if you think about it, and if you're emitting a laser and you're needing to receive the laser, and your hand is now moving around, the algorithm originally has probably been, and certainly for the Ranger being an older product, it was probably developed around this not moving, right? Not accounting for that as much. And so now if the algorithm is expecting to see a certain value, but your hand is moving around just from shaking or whatever, and you're now getting not as strong or consistent of a return, that's going to affect that range and performance. And, once you start getting out to farther distances, I think we tend to recommend trying to, mount it to something, whether it's a tripod, or try to brace yourself as you're ranging, try to give the rangefinder a little bit more stability as you're trying to range those farther targets.
Do you guys out in the field see many people tripod range finding? I feel like
I haven't. I can't say I haven't. Yeah. I have, though, many, many times tried to stabilize a rangefinder like Rob's talking about.
Right.
Although I think, for example, in my background is definitely more in the hunting end of things. It's usually more advantageous to lean it off a tree branch, or maybe you're sitting in some rocks and lean down and get on top of a rock. In a pinch, a tripod works great, but it just takes a little bit longer to latch the thing on there.
I think if you had the time, and
it's definitely going to
maybe
be
an
the
extremely
best
long range shot. I mean, that's going to be.
I guess maybe
the way to go.
I'm maybe thinking of more setups I've seen where guys have a spotter and a rangefinder mounted on like a bracket, together off their tripod and getting everything kind of aligned that way. So.
Kinetic something or another. I can't remember if it's.
Yeah, I forget off the top of my head
they've got,
but it's a pretty sweet setup that way.
Another, I feel like I'm just like this giant proponent of the scan feature, but you're talking about hand movement, and I know when I hit that initial press on the rangefinder, I know I always kind of bob the rangefinder
it's
down.
It's just like when you do a trigger pull,
right?
I mean, yeah.
And so that's why I like that scan feature, because you're kind of getting that, constant relay of ranges. It's like, okay, the first one might have been a little off, but like, okay, and then I'm able to hold it steadier while just pressing the button down continuously, and then you're like, okay, good. I know that I'm getting a solid range.
When we went out west and I took the Fury 5000s, exclusively scan mode. I just only ever used it because
I've gotten into the habit. That's just my go-to.
Push it and
now.
hold it down.
Yeah.
And it's easy because then every time I'm like, okay, I'm lined up perfectly. You click the button once, you get that little nice reticle that kind of shows you in general where your laser is going to go, and it's okay. Here we go. Click. Crap! I just. And then you got to do it. And then I get pissed and I just start clicking it. Click, and I'm like missing all over the place.
Well, and then with the Fury being a 10 power and being a binocular, you're probably almost more apt to see that it's exaggerated a little bit versus
versus like a 6 power monocular.
Circling back on the Fury, we're talking about and this was just a question I had that popped up, so hopefully I don't derail back to something else. But the receiving of that impulse, if you will, if I'm saying that correctly, is that happening in both objectives or just one?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on this one. I want to say that the emission is happening on one barrel and the receiving is happening on another barrel. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Pretty sure, but not 100%. Yep.
Noted.
Yep.
Noted. One other one I have written on here is battery life. People ask us about battery life a lot, and it seems as though, one of the biggest factors that goes into this with a rangefinder, especially a rangefinder, it seems, is the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And you have that story, Mark, where you and Ryan Muckenhern were out in some, I don't even know where you were. It sounded miserable. And you guys had to keep your rangefinders in your armpits so that the battery wouldn't die.
I think it was...
And that's not a rangefinder problem.
25.
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's not a rangefinder problem. That has to do with the chemistry of batteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit to that? Because I know,
It really is. It affects red dots. It affects illuminated rifle scopes. It affects your cell phone.
Right. I am not a super brushed up on like alkaline battery chemistry, but I know from lithium ion battery perspective, once you start to get into colder temperatures, you have like a voltage droop, or basically you aren't able to supply the same amount of power. Mm-hmm. So you can get into weird scenarios with the rangefinders potentially where you can get reduced display brightness or just reduced functionality and get into kind of like a brownout stage, which is what you call it with electronics, where there's not it's not too little to even turn the device on, but it's not quite enough to like have it function properly, so you can get some erratic behavior, which is maybe not
like
what if you
not getting
seeing,
a reading back on your rangefinder.
Yep, or it's not sending the right amount of juice to the laser and that sort of thing. So that's just kind of a function of the battery chemistry. Yeah. And then certain batteries do better at lower temperatures. I think typically AA's and AAA's tend to do better than CR123As, which tend to do better than CR2s, which unfortunately are a lot of what the rangefinder batteries are, and that's more of a form factor thing.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
But I guess kind of quick and dirty on batteries. That's kind of what's going on with that.
I'll make this analogy for you, Jim, that just popped in my head, but you think of your car. Starting on a super crazy cold day versus when it's, summertime. Summertime she turns right over on a cold day. So might need to rev a little. You get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really, so what's happening is like batteries are a chemical, basically a chemical reaction is what's going on in there between the anode and the cathode. So as you get colder, you're slowing down that chemical reaction, which is making the battery work less effectively. So. I'm just not sure 100% on, lithium, tends to cut off at -40 hard stop, or alkaline is, -20 if one is better for cold weather performance. I do know that for the same form factor, like if you looked at a AAA versus a AAA, alkaline versus lithium does have a lot higher battery capacity or energy density than an alkaline would have. So you'd get potentially longer runtime, all else being equal. Out of a lithium battery than you would out of an alkaline battery. They're also a little bit more expensive, so just like most other things in lives, there are trade-offs there. So
yeah. Ready for this segue?
Do it.
Have we ever seen one catch on fire like a Samsung cell phone? Watch this segue.
I have not.
Okay, cool. So speaking of safety, eye safety.
God, I didn't even see it coming.
Wow.
You mentioned that
Seamless.
earlier. You mentioned that earlier, which I thought was pretty interesting. These all have different. We had to pull out our super duper eye doctor eyes earlier and read some of these.
Use the binoculars to read
these warning labels. Now, some of these are like class 1 lasers. That's what this one. Or wait, something. Oh,
that's a class 1. The Impact is a class 3R. The Fury is a class 1, and this product is a class 1 as well.
What's the deal with the different classes?
Yeah, good question. So it's just it's relating back to eye safety to a human. So class 1 being the most eye safe, then class 1M, then 3R, then I think, or there might even be a 3 before 3R, and then I think it's class 4. And once you get to class 4 and above, that tends to be something where you can start to cause pretty quick damage to the human eye. So, I think most consumer products you're going to see are going to be 3R or below. And I don't know off the top of my head what the exposure limits are for each of them, but it effectively with a Class 1 laser. Actually, I won't even say this because then I don't have to be held legally responsible for anything that somebody does. But you'd have a very hard time damaging your eye with looking into the business end of the rangefinder and ranging it. So I think an example we came up with was like let's say you get a little kid that gets into your hunting gear or whatever and pulls out the rangefinder and is just looking at it and just lasing it nonstop into his eye. Like I got a little boy, so I could see him maybe doing that at some point, right? That's not going to damage his eye, if he's looking into the wrong end of it and is holding that button down. Once you get Class 4 and above, you can have that damage happen pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. For Class 1, I don't know what the time is, but it would be unreasonably long for that to actually do damage, like to the point probably where you'd have to have your eye open longer than it would be reasonable for you to blink. Like you'd have to get into a staring contest with this rangefinder.
Right.
And before you cause some damage. Yeah. And then just as you walk up from Class 1 to Class 1M to Class 3R, I think that exposure time is less, but it's still not really reasonable to I would say in most reasonable situations to cause any permanent damage to your eyes that way. So
you're saying the amateur LASIK I've been trying to do for the last 3 weeks isn't going to work?
Yeah, you might need to step up to a Class 4.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, let's try it. You can go on Amazon and grab one of those later. Awesome. Mark, what else do you got before we
Man, my big one was weather and atmospherics and how that would
Oh,
affect.
shoot, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Just other things that
maybe
can affect
fog versus bluebird day or rain or how that's impacting maybe one laser versus a different one.
Extreme humidity even maybe.
Sure. Yeah, it can. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. You'll see on the same rangefinder, you will see different ranging performance if you're like hunting out west at higher altitude than you would, in the Midwest or in the East Coast at a lower altitude.
You said better
ranging performance. Yeah. So at higher altitude, the air is less dense. So you're getting kind of less, I guess, resistance or less diffraction on the laser signal that's being sent out. And typically, I guess at higher altitudes, also it's going to be drier, right?
Undoubtedly, yeah. And in the western climates where guys are using those are going to be by nature drier too.
Yeah. And that's probably more of a driver than anything else because humidity, if you think of it at like a small scale, you've got, water vapor that's in the air. And that water, if you think about like, just looking at something through a droplet of water and how that distorts the image and how the light is kind of going through and being refracted back.
Trying to shoot a fish with a smoke pole muzzleloader.
Yeah.
Through water.
Got to compensate for that.
You got to compensate for that.
But we should come out with a water compensator.
Jim, thanks for really putting that into terms that most folks are going to understand.
Right. Well, if you listen to our
who hasn't been in that situation,
baiting fish versus baiting deer podcast, you know exactly what we're talking about.
So yeah, humidity and rain and snow are all going to affect ranging performance to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get that signal kind of weakened or diffused as it's coming back to the rangefinder. Now, what's really cool is you can kind of plan on that, or you can kind of plan for that, rather, with the algorithm that's doing the signal processing on the rangefinder. So some of our newer stuff that we've come out with, like the Fury, like this guy, it performs really, really consistently in rain. You won't have the same max range as you would if it's a non-rainy day or a dry day, but it's not going to be totally handicapped to the point where some other products are, where if you try to range in dense fog or you try to range in rain or snow, and it just gives you like a totally nonsensical number or it just doesn't give you a range return at all. It's a cool thing that you can kind of tune the rangefinder for and in those situations.
So is that's like mapping your ECU or something for a wet day?
Yeah, I guess loosely analog to that.
So you said it's something you plan ahead. So like you can go into a setting and be like, hey, it's raining.
No,
out. Or is it's just that it performs better.
Right.
We sort of design that into the algorithm so that
So it's like, here's what you could expect.
You don't have to manually go in.
Mm-hmm. So
right.
hey rangefinder, here's what you would expect to see from a rainy day or a snowy day. So if you see this type of signal return, treat it as such and kind of filter that out as noise and wait for a more, stronger signal to come back and use that.
Okay, gotcha.
So you might see the ranging time decrease a little bit. But at the same time, ranging times it's taking longer to think. Ranging times have gotten so quick now. It's like, you're getting a range back basically at the same time it takes for a human reaction time. We're talking like quarter second. I think a human reaction time is, 240 thousandths of a second, so 0.24, a little bit under.
That's what I was going to
say. So at what point is all this technology that you're putting into rangefinders and helping them learn the situation and smart homes and smart cars and smart keys and all that? At what point are they all going to start communicating to rise against us?
Well, it's already happening, Jimmy, so it's too late. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
No, I don't think the singularity has happened
yet. It's all about
yet.
short extension cords.
Yeah.
They just can't go as far.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know, though.
Yeah, none of that's probably anyone who's spent time hunting with rangefinders. And if you've been out in rain and fog and snow, I think most people have probably had experiences where you're simply not, you're not getting readings or you're not reading as far as you think it should. And it's
in your experience, if it's just getting real nasty out, and let's say you have a rangefinder that doesn't have quite this level of technology, for example, like the Fury or the new one we're going to introduce here in a second, do you kind of just can your rangefinder at that point and go to your reticle, or like what has your experience been?
It would depend, outside of, if you were rifle hunting, for example, a lot of times you'd be in conditions that would be such that they're sort of effectively shortening your effective shooting range at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So, a lot of times it doesn't really work against, I can see in archery sometimes where you're working at shorter distances, still, very viable to shoot with a bow, but you're struggling to range stuff. That could happen. Usually it's a matter of compensating, waiting for the weather to change a little bit or perhaps trying to get a little bit closer, something like that. Rob didn't touch on one of the other things you do run into is daylight versus cloud cover. And when you're out on a very bright sunny day, a lot of times that'll adversely affect the rangefinder's ability to get a signal back.
Because the wavelengths from all the sun are entering the same.
I would guess that probably has a lot to do with it. And and there in a scenario like that, if you were struggling at long range to hit something and it was very sunny out, perhaps you could wait till a cloud came over. And even just having a cloud come over the sun can all of a sudden make the difference between getting a signal back or not.
Yeah, that direct sunlight is kind of a lot of that noise you mentioned, right?
Right, because you're getting full spectrum light out of the sun from UV to IR to a certain extent. Don't quote me on the exact wavelength bounds, but yeah, on the IR side of things, higher wavelength side of things, you can run into
your lasers. Your laser is just yet another one of many wavelengths the receiver is receiving.
Right, competing signals.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What about maybe like a lack of light, like early in the morning and late in the day? Can that have an impact at all?
I don't think as much as it would visually, just being able to not see as far.
You made the engineer say,
Yeah.
Well done.
I'm just going to throw down the headset and walk out.
Well done.
Mark's checked all his boxes for the podcast.
Yeah.
No, I don't believe so. I think it's more, like I was saying, you're limited visually with how far you can see. Because you're emitting, the light's being emitted from the laser, irrespective of what the conditions are. It's the ability to receive it, I guess. So I suppose if the lower light conditions are somehow adversely affecting the reflectance of the target for whatever reason, then somehow, but I don't think so.
Target's still the same target.
Still the same target.
Because when the sun comes up, it's going to reflect as much as it would in the bright daylight, probably, right? So if you shine a laser at it, you're just adding that light to it, maybe. Who knows? If you can see it, give it a shot.
Yeah, just
with your rangefinder. Okay, let's not quote that.
If you can see it, shoot it, Jimmy Hamilton.
No, with a rangefinder. Let's just add that fine print in there.
What caveat?
Should we? What else you got? Or should we move on to this? People might be on the edge of their.
I know I am.
Should we talk about it?
Yes.
The new and exciting product that we have here. Rob, your team's been working on it forever. Why don't you say it?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
All right. Well, what we've got is the Razor HD 4000 laser rangefinder.
There it is. Again, like we said, if you're watching on YouTube, you can actually look at this thing now on the table, full 360. Rob's doing a slow spin. So the Razor HD 4000. What is super awesome about this is a monocular style. So if you've seen, as far as kind of shape-wise, the Ranger and the Impact rangefinders that we have, they're both monocular styles.
Yep.
So one eye. And, okay, so right off the bat, you see Razor HD 4000. So it's more capable than a Ranger 1800, just distance capability-wise.
Right.
So what else is super special about it? I mean, or is there anything unique about the way that it's getting that 4,000, or what's going on here that people would think is pretty sweet?
Yeah, so a couple of things going on with this one. In no particular order of importance, you still have a belt clip, which is pretty stellar.
Heck yes.
It's a fully magnesium body and chassis. So when we say chassis, that means all the internal components, electronics, lenses, and things like that are being housed in, that's magnesium as well. So that allows for you to have a really good consistent alignment and rigidity while still keeping the weight down. Magnesium is about 40% lighter, roughly, than aluminum. So that allows for it to be a bit lighter as well. Other things that are really notable about this, the optics are incredible. We really spent a long time developing the laser and the optics in conjunction to really not have to compromise either. So yeah, you're going to have a pretty stellar optical experience, I guess, with this one. It's a 7-power monocular. And then in addition to that, it's got a couple of new modes. So like the Fury we were talking about, and pretty much all the rangefinders have just a normal mode. And the Fury has a last mode. In addition to that, the Razor also has a first mode and what we're calling an enhanced laser ranging mode, or ELR mode. Don't get that confused with extreme long range shooting, because it's not intended for that necessarily. But basically, that ELR mode, the enhanced laser ranging mode, is going to build a target. And what I mean by that is kind of touching on that algorithm thing that I was telling you guys about before. So the 4,000 yards, you can range out to 4,000 yards with this thing, which is pretty bonkers considering that this is a binocular and having a 42 millimeter, collector versus
larger,
a 25
heavier,
millimeter.
bigger lenses. Yeah.
Right. You can almost get the same ranging performance on reflective targets, which is pretty crazy.
If I remember right, the tree and the deer, or anything remotely similar to that performance out of this 4,000 yard capable rangefinder is actually the same as the 5,000 yard capable Fury.
It's pretty darn
it's
close.
Just or very, very close to it. It's just the Fury is more capable at reflective.
Yeah, a little bit. For that extra 1,000 yards, if you need it, going to 4,000 to 5,000 yards.
Right. On giant street signs.
Right. But the cool thing with this is that ELR mode, that enhanced laser ranging mode. If you've got a deer that's way out there, that's typically farther than what your normal mode would allow for you. If you can take the extra time to range that target, it's going to give you a little bit better ranging performance. So if you can't quite get there, pop it into ELR mode. And the other thing that's really nice with this one that we did differently is, so it has 2 buttons. The other monoculars have 2 buttons as well. But the nice thing that we did with the menu button is just with a single press on that, that's going to have you go through your ranging modes just with a single press instead of having to dive into the menu structure and go and select whatever you want to. So you can really quickly and easily flip between, first and last or normal and ELR or whatever you need to do. So that's nice for quickly changing conditions or situations. But yeah, that ELR mode will allow you to get some better ranging if you can kind of trade off waiting for a little bit longer for you to get that signal or that return back. So with ELR, what's happening is, let's say you got a target that's really far away. You're going to range it, and you're going to hold down and basically do a scan with it, hold down the measure button. And so it's getting that, it's sending out pulse trains, right? I mentioned that at the kind of earlier part of the podcast. So as you're holding scan down, it's sending out these pulse trains. And as these pulse trains are coming back, the rangefinder's looking at each one, and it's comparing each subsequent reception, I guess, of the pulse train to the previous one. And after a certain amount of time where it's able to what we call build a target, it's going to give you that range back.
Okay.
So it's effectively taking this signal, which is probably going to be pretty weak because it's so far away, and look at it iteratively and then come back with a range after it's looked at a couple of return signals to compare against each other. So that's kind of a cool way with software, you can really eke out some more performance without necessarily jamming more power into the laser diode or changing anything physically with the rangefinder.
Cool. Yeah, good point. Let's see. Let's talk about other features here. I just opened the box. I was kind of being a hand model over here, which is a terrible job for me because I have terrible eczema. But anyway, one thing I'll point out too, you get a twist up and down eye cup, right? Which is unlike kind of the rubbery ones on our other binoculars here. So that's a little nicer feature, similar to your binoculars that you have right over the diopter. Some care and attention to detail was put into designing this case here.
Yeah.
It comes with this case, and this is like it's like a semi-soft, semi-hard. What do you describe this as?
Yeah, I think it's like a soft shell type of...
like a soft shell, like sunglass case. If you get a really nice set of sunglasses that comes in like that.
Yep. Yeah, Mike did a great job designing this case. It turned out really well.
Yeah, our industrial designer.
Yep.
Let's see. It looks like it's got webbing on here, so you can attach the case to some webbing. It opens up, kind of like clamshell. Is that what that is? Clamshell style. Yep. Rangefinder just sits in there nice and neat. This is pretty sweet. It's got the you can zip it closed.
Yep.
Or you can leave it unzipped, but then have this kind of tension
shock
rubber,
cord,
cord
tension, so you can get into it real quickly if you need to,
and with less
a little
noise.
quicker, a little quieter too.
Yeah, a little quieter. You don't have to use the zipper.
Yep.
And then the rangefinder's right in there, like you said. That good old ambidextrous belt clip.
Yep.
Can go either way.
I tell you what, man, that is like we sing it, I guess, but.
Dude, we talk about the belt clip so much, and I always feel like I'm being some kind of like QVC gimmicky guy. And it's got a belt clip, but dude, I use the belt clip.
It comes in
always.
Like when we first put it on there in the first Ranger model, I was like, that's kind of a cool, extra, unique feature. Dude, use it all the time. It comes
always.
in
so
it comes
convenient.
in way more handy than I think on the surface it might appear.
Yep.
Yeah.
The I guess another cool feature with this rangefinder is we did something different with the display technology. So it's kind of a hybrid display. Which I'll, I guess, spare you some of the technical jargon, but it allows you to have a really bright display while still keeping the efficiency up. So behind the laser actually firing, the display is the second highest power consumption component as a part of the rangefinder. So that's nice that you're kind of able to squeak some more ranges out of it from that standpoint. Because if you think about it, when you're ranging a target, you pull it up, you press the button that brings your display up, and then you typically fire again, and that shoots the laser. But the display is staying on prior to and after you've ranged something. Right. So it ends up being a non-zero battery draw, part of the rangefinder. So it's kind of nice we were able to pick up some additional efficiency there without trading off brightness.
Doesn't it get super? Yeah, it gets super bright.
Yeah, it gets like uncomfortably bright. We actually had to throttle it. So the
governor on there.
Yeah, right. And no, there's not a way to take the governor off for those that are asking. Though it would be fun if you can find out. Maybe we'll send you a free.
I want non-eye safe bright.
I want more. I don't care what it is. I want more.
Yeah. So brightness setting. I think it has 5 brightness settings. Brightness setting 5 is pretty uncomfortable.
It's pretty bright. Yeah, it gets really bright.
You got this toolless battery compartment, which is so nice. You don't need a flathead to get in your battery compartment anymore.
Yep, and it sits flush when you're not needing to unscrew it. So that's kind of nice. One less snag surface.
Comes with a battery in there. Is this a CR2? Is there
CR2?
A CR? Okay.
Yep. It should be a lithium CR2. Yep.
What were you saying earlier? There is a difference. Like our Impact has 3 eyes on the front of it. And then this and the Ranger have 2. What's going on there? I don't. Yeah. Obviously, they're all rangefinders. Is one better than the other, or is it just like a manufacturing easier to make? Well, I don't know.
Yeah. So again, I'll speak in general terms. Typically, what you'll see a 3-eye system with a less expensive rangefinder. And so what's going on with this is your optical train for your visual optics is completely separated from the laser transmission and reception paths. So on the Impact, the laser is being emitted on the bottom eye, and it's being received through the middle eye.
Okay.
So it's aligned to do that, and your optics are all up here. Another reason for that, I believe, is because it's an LCD display. So that LCD display is actually sitting in the optical train. So that might get kind of confusing if you're trying to also have that laser signal come back through that LCD. So this is typically less expensive to manufacture.
Cool.
And then, so what's going on with the Razor and with the Ranger is it's being emitted through the bottom eye, but so this is really actually pretty interesting from a physics standpoint. The 905 signal is coming back through the top. And so what's happening there is you're like, well, how's that working? Isn't that just going to come back and go straight into my eyeball?
Yeah.
And so actually with the optical system that we have here, we've got strategic coatings that are going to reflect only that 905 nanometer wavelength back into the receiver. So effectively, you're emitting it from the bottom, it's coming back, and that specific wavelength of light, which is outside of the visible spectrum to humans, is bouncing off of some surfaces that have a very specific coating tuned for that 905 wavelength into the receiving diode. So it's pretty trick from that standpoint.
You know, Mark, elementary stuff.
Actually, I sent Rob the email telling him how to do that.
Oh, okay. Good. Well, Mark, we can credit you for this design. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think I deleted it, though,
It's
so I
got-
can't really show you that I did
Yeah,
that.
sorry, I don't have any proof. Just take my word. Okay, yeah, and it does have. You can see the emitter and the objective or whatever are a little bit bigger than that of like on the Ranger 1800. Does that have some aspects to do with the fact that it can range a little bit further? Is that just part of? You can't necessarily just make it, hey, take the Ranger 1800, just make that bigger, and it'll work better, right? I mean, it's all part of the system.
Yeah, exactly. You have to kind of design for it, otherwise it's just kind of wasted space, I guess, for lack of a better term.
All right.
Yeah, because the laser diodes are different between the two. There's a lot of differences between the two.
It's bigger. It's very slightly bigger than the 1800, but it's actually lighter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's probably due to the material, the magnesium
Mm-hmm.
that I was telling you earlier. I believe the Ranger is aluminum chassis or aluminum frame or body, and maybe chassis as well.
I have relatively small hands. Yes, I just admitted that on the podcast. The Ranger 1800 fits in my hand like a glove.
Mm-hmm.
This Razor 4000 is a smidge bigger, but it's not uncomfortable.
Still
at all.
like a glove.
Still like a glove. I would like as far as just straight up feel goes, the 1800. But dude, 4000 and like all this technology and way more modes and all that, and it's like it still feels very similar. It's very easily for everybody on YouTube.
Yeah,
guy with small hands here holding this thing.
Guy with reasonable sized hands right
And then
here.
Reasonable size
when you
hands.
got the big hands.
And when you
I-
have
I
Paul
love the
Neess
Razor,
hands,
yeah.
you must love that Razor.
yeah.
It fits well, and I love
Yeah.
I love the buttons on that thing too.
Yeah.
They're
They're
larger, big.
They are,
very
yeah.
easy.
Yeah,
and
really easy to feel with gloves.
kind
Yeah.
of scalloped this away, so it's a bit more ergonomic to hold on to. I don't know if you can
With gloved
kind of see the
hands.
difference there, but spacing wise, it's similar. But yeah, the buttons are quite a bit larger and just kind of it's more comfortable. I feel like in the hand.
It
as
is
well.
extremely comfortable to hold. It's still tripod adaptable too.
Yep.
Still
Yeah, we got the tripod lug on the bottom there. So.
quarter 20 threads.
Yep.
You were
and
talking.
Rob,
oh,
I was
sorry.
going to say, Rob touched on earlier the optics too, and having used that thing in some of the testing stuff, it works even better as a quick monocular. It's an improvement over the Rangers and the other small ones. It's really nice. It's a legit optical system that can be used standalone in a
very
bench,
little, if any, kind of like a tint, from the display.
Right.
Yeah, we paid special attention to that. Like optically, there's very little distortion. It's really I'd put it up against anything else that's out there. I mean, obviously, working here, people would expect that I'd say that, but yeah, I'd say go ahead and put it up against anything else, and you're gonna see very very good optical performance, and like the price point isn't really gonna break the bank either when it comes to.
What are these going to go for? We should have said that right away.
Oh yeah, so
asks.
these street price for this is gonna be $500, so $499. And if you look at other competing rangefinders out there, it's going to be an incredible value. What we try to do with our products here at Vortex, so I think it's right in line with that.
Sweet. I like it. We say we're a little bit over an hour here. Actually, we're a bit. We've been talking about rangefinders, man. Should we dive into last calls?
That's the last call.
Rob, last call is basically just your final thought that's mildly related. We'll save you for last.
Okay, sure.
The guests always say the best ones. Mine is, I'm going to steal it from everybody. Check out that Razor 4000. We're going to try and release this podcast sometime around the same time as you'll see it on the website, on social media. There'll be some cool videos and stuff. So you'll actually get to, for those just listening, you'll get to see it, what it actually looks like. All right.
All right, here comes my traditional 7 last calls.
Yes.
7 last.
number one, these podcasts we do with the engineers, I just find infinitely interesting.
Fascinating.
Number two, my last calls come from some in-the-field experience with this unit. Actually, I guess it was close to final prototype earlier this fall. Worked amazing. The optics were awesome. And we were actually in a scenario where we had inclement weather, actually pretty heavy snowstorm, big flakes, and we were able to range deer, which I would assume we actually could have done it further. But, I'll also mention it was crazy cold. I bet it was definitely maybe somewhere around 10 degrees, I think, not including wind chill. Ranged a buck at 600 and some yards, and we were able to execute the shot and get the buck. So it was just,
that's awesome.
I mean, it couldn't have worked better. And so you were talking about how this works really well in inclement weather, and I guess that's just a real world example where it's like, yep, it does.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I used it out at the Vortex extremely sunny day. I couldn't find anything that I couldn't range.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
I was just gonna say, 600 yards on a buck with it being cold and snowing or whatever it was is, I mean, that's a super useful use case scenario of that because, I mean, that's kind of towards the end, I think, of where you'd be taking a shot or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And was able to do that in probably the worst conditions that you could have thrown at it. So
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I can tag right along to Mark's. I was doing some of the early testing on these too and used it up in Alaska this last fall. And I had an interesting afternoon with a couple of guys, and we were sitting around at midday looking at a distant mountain and sort of ranging it up the side of the mountain. And both of these guys had very high-end European range-finding binoculars. And so it sort of turned into a competition of who could range further going up this mountain. And it turned out the Razor 4000 beat both of the high-end Euro binos going up the mountain. And, it was a mix of sort of alders and brush and trees, and I think where it finally topped out on this stuff, and it wasn't the easiest targets to hit. It was somewhere around 3,700 yards, as I remember.
Nice.
And neither of the Euro binos could hit where we ended up at. So it was pretty impressive.
That's cool.
That makes you feel good.
Yeah.
super cool.
God, I just love burying people in things. Did I say that out loud?
No,
No.
Totally wasn't recorded.
I'm sure those are absolutely fine products as well.
Paul, you did a much nicer job leaving
That's
out
why
any
it's so
specific
cool.
competitors on that than I did.
We might give yours the old MTV bleep. but
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
You're good.
Sorry about
You're
that,
good.
everybody. So.
You're good. What's your last call though, Rob?
Geez, my last call is stay tuned for more Rangefinders stuff.
Cliffhanger!
Double teaser. Yeah.
Because we got a lot of cool stuff coming out. So, in addition to that, we're getting into springtime. Check your tire pressures, check your tread depths, and make sure you stay safe out there on the road.
And just like we predicted, they always have the best last calls. We won't say anything else other than that. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.